Hello, Daniel and Laura. This book is called Baggy Brown and the Royal Baby by Mick Inkpen. Baggy Brown started out very well indeed. He was made with 999 others just like himself as a special limited edition, costing £499.99 each. In his ear was a gold button in the shape of a crown. Do you know why that was? Because Baggy Brown was made to celebrate the first birthday of Her Royal Highness Prince Sophiniania, firstborn daughter to the King and Queen of Thingland. Princess Sophiniania, Sophie for short, also started out well, as you can imagine. To give you some idea, this is just the top of the pile of cuddly toys that arrived for her the very day she was born. But do you know, not one of them could stop her crying. Week after week, her little howls rang right royally throughout the palace. In fact, her cries were so upsetting that the King and Queen had to pull their crowns over their ears. At this time, Baggy Brown was not called Baggy Brown at all, but just number 1, which was the number stamped on the little gold crown in his ear. He was the first of the 1,000 special bears and the only one without a price tag. He was priceless, you see, because he was to be presented to Princess Sophie. And because of this, he had a large "Not for Sale" label slapped on the end of his nose. Ouch! It was such a shock that Baggy Brown did not line himself up properly when the big grabbler came round. It missed him completely. While all the other bears were grabbled and whizzed away, number 1 continued along the conveyor belt and fell straight off the end. Down he fell, down, down, and back into the very innards of the big red teddy bear machine at Better Bears Limited. He was grubbed and fluffed and plumped and scrodged and frizzled and squidged and pummelled and hooshed and hooshed and hooshed again. And when it had finished with him, the big red teddy bear machine spat him out onto the factory floor, where a passing factory worker called Jack trod on him. Now, Jack wasn't to know that Baggy Brown was a priceless bear. He certainly didn't look like one, so he picked him up and took him home for his young son Alfie. Alfie loved Baggy Brown from the moment he saw him. He loved his lopsided face and his soft, saggy body. He loved, too, the strange gold button under Baggy Brown's squashed ear, even though he couldn't make no sense of the name on it. Number 1, read Alfie slowly. Number 1 is a silly name for a bear, and he began to think of a proper name. For 3 days, Alfie carried Baggy Brown everywhere with him. But on the 4th day, he hid him, and I will tell you why. On that day, the television news finished with a story about a missing royal bear. Number 1, first in a long line of bears, is missing, said the reporter. He was holding up number 2 bear. Number 1, that's you, Baggy Brown, said Alfie. And that is why, almost as soon as Baggy Brown got his real name, he was being stuffed headfirst into one of Jack's smelly old wellies. That night, Alfie couldn't sleep. He crept downstairs and rescued Baggy Brown from the stair cupboard. Silently he opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night. Alfie knew his way through all the narrow alleyways that led down to the banks of the great river. He knew, too, all the watery places where the coal barges slopped against the wharfs. And he knew exactly which boat would head off into the city before first light. It was into this that he jumped, curled himself into a ball around Baggy Brown, and fell asleep. Baggy Brown was wide awake as the barge slipped out of the great river. He was awake as it slid under black bridges and winking stars. He was awake as it sounded its horn, just as it always did when approaching the royal palace to drop off its load of coal for the royal boiler house. But all the while, Alfie slept on. Which is how he was found by the royal stoker. The stoker, who did not have a clue what to do with the grubby little boy and his grubby little bear, summoned a royal footman. "This belongs to the princess," said Alfie, holding up Baggy Brown. The stoker and the footman burst into laughter. "I don't think so, son," said the stoker. "Don't be ridiculous," said the footman, "and take that disgusting object away." But Alfie refused to budge. "It does," he said. "It belongs to the princess." So the footman sent for one of the ladies in waiting. Lady Jane Farquhar was undaunted by the smell of old welly rising from Baggy Brown, and, having 5 children of her own, she knew exactly when a child was telling the truth. She examined Baggy Brown closely. As she lifted his coal-black ear, there was a bright glint of gold. "Aha!" she said, and read aloud, "Number 1. "His name is Baggy Brown," said Alfie. After a quick clean-up with Lady Jane Farquhar's hanky, Alfie was led through the palace to the royal nursery, where Princess Sophie was howling as usual. Sophie looked at Alfie. She looked at Baggy Brown. She stopped crying. And for the first time in 53 weeks, the royal palace was quiet. Sadly, Alfie pushed Baggy Brown through the bars of the royal cot and was led away. But at this moment, Sophie started to howl even louder than before. "Alfie," whispered Lady Jane, "it's not Baggy Brown that Sophie wants. It's you." So that sealed it. Alfie was allowed to keep Baggy Brown, which of course meant that Baggy Brown was allowed to keep Alfie. And what about Sophie? Well, the following week a parcel arrived for Alfie. In it was a silver phone with just one golden button. From that day on, whenever he liked, Alfie could call for the royal barge to take him and his friends up the great river to the royal palace to visit Sophie. This is them in the tree house that the king had built in the palace garden when Sophie was 5 and Alfie was 9. And if I had longer to tell you what happened, I would tell you that Sophie loved Alfie and his Baggy Brown bear for the rest of her life, and married him just after her 21st birthday. I would tell you that Alfie's father Jack became the proud owner of Better Bears Limited, but his proudest day was the day he learned that his grandson, future King of Thingland, was to be named after him. I would tell you that on the day His Royal Highness Prince Jack was born, 10,000 bears rolled off the conveyor belt at Better Bears Limited. And I would tell you that none of them was loved as much as Baggy Brown.